speakers. We have with us Michael Fisher, who is CEO of Flick Consulting, and also Mike Giambattista, who is CEO and publisher of The Customer. And they are going to be talking about how CXOs are shifting to maintain customer trust as they deal with the radically changing customer landscape, especially now with all of the upheaval that we're all experiencing. Mike and Michael recently co-authored 2 papers that they're going to touch on. One is the CXO Report, The Road to Customerization. And then they went a deep dive into the road to trust and transparency. So with that, Mike and Michael, welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're already getting some commentary here. We're being asked right off the bat if we're drinking, and the answer for one of us at least is no.
And for one of us, it's yes. So join us. Everybody go get a glass of wine.
Right, and
it's 5 o'clock.
No, seriously, thank you. As the first one of these series, I don't think anybody really knew what to expect, but the turnout's been really encouraging. So COVID lockdown nonsense notwithstanding, we're glad you're here. So I've been told I could take a moment or two and just talk about what the customer is, since we're a fairly new entity, what we do, why we exist in the first place. And then I kind of want to lead into the work that Michael and I have done with a handful of C-level leaders on issues of trust and customer engagement. But so Michael and I met probably not quite a year ago at a CRMC conference in Chicago. Struck up a quick friendship because we both ended up talking about the idea of, and no, this is not a shill here, of trust as it relates to customers, as it relates to the MarTech space, who you can believe and who you can't, and those kinds of things. And this project was, I won't say it was in the works, but it was on the drawing board at that point. So Michael and I put our heads together, and here we are, 9-10 months later, and we've got the customer, and it's off and running, and really happy with where it's going and what we intend to do with it. But our foundation and our reason for being really has everything to do with trust. We need to build a publication because I think this space needs a publication that can trust what's being published. And I'm never very popular for saying things like this, but in this space, it's not uncommon that what you see published has been paid for. And there's nothing wrong with that. Look, we all need to get paid. We all love to get paid. But if it's being paid for, how much can you trust it? And that really is the foundation of how we evaluate what we publish. Does it have value for you as our readers, as an advisory source, as a source of guidance and expertise? So I can hop off my soapbox now. But that led us to a handful of conversations with C-level executives that really started out organically about just introducing the customer, what we're all about, what we're trying to accomplish. And then we wanted to hear from them, what's on their tables, what are their challenges and hurdles. And that conversation or series of conversations led us down a really, really interesting path. So if I may, I'm going to just take over the screen here. Any objection? Okay, here we go. And action, okay. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're up to, where we're headed, and some of the things you're going to hear tonight as Michael and I go through our reports. So we ended up, what was it, Michael? Probably, I think 8 C-level executives ended up participating in the final version of the CXO report. I think we had 1 or 2 early on that just didn't kind of make the cut for whatever reason. But this theme of what the customer landscape looks like with all of its new changes and hurdles, the regulatory environment with GDPR and CCPA and all those, and now that the customer has way more control of the conversation than they've ever had before. What do brands need to do there? And we ended up putting this together, and I'll say it was prescient, because this was a couple of months before COVID, when we were talking about changes that had come at a pace, say, over the past year or two, which historically is still really fast. But here with COVID-19 and our lockdown and the absolute shaking up of customer expectations, everything in this report has become that much more important. And incidentally, I invite you to download it at the customer.net. You'll see a big banner right up top where you can find it. I just wanted to highlight, maybe Michael, you can do this, highlight some of what we heard in that report and talk about who these people are, if you would.
Sure. So as Mike pointed out, we talked to 8 or 10 CXOs as it relates to the development of data and trust. But then we went out and we wanted to validate what it is that they were saying. So we went to folks like Alvin Stokes, who's SVP of customer experience at Cable and Wireless, and we asked him, you know, what did he have to say? And you'll see the quote here. I'm not gonna read it. We talked to David Eldridge, CEO of 3 Radical, and got his feedback. But he's one of the CEOs in the paper to begin with. But when we went to Ron Stopa, he's the CMO of Michaels, and you know, obviously Michaels is running very hard at changing lots and lots of things, and then all of a sudden COVID comes into the mix, and now, you know, look, they got to deliver product curbside. Lots of things are changing, but everybody started to sort of bring a perspective that was aligned, right? And we consciously didn't try to align anyone in our qualitative approach in terms of collecting. We just sort of had an open-ended conversation, and these themes started coming out. You know, Tim Souther, who's the Chief Data Officer and is actively involved in healthcare with a company called Change Healthcare, he says specifically consumer trust is actually everything. The other thing that he says is it's time to solve for your customer, not your channel, not your product, not your promotion, not your service. It's time to solve for your customer. So we found some really great feedback here, and you'll find that in the report as you go through it.
What I think we've compiled here, and to be really transparent, after we had these conversations, we decided that it would be smart for us to package this. The common theme was what we ended up calling customerization, but the comments are really candid. They're the kinds of things that, you know, it really is amazing what people say when you turn the camera off, or when it's a non-promotional environment, when you're just really talking. And so that's what we end up getting here. And yes, we had to cleanse some of it because some of it had some potty mouth language, but you know, that happens in these conversations. Go ahead.
Accountability here was really interesting. Ron Stopa saying, well, we've created this and now we have to own it. It's time to clean it up. Customer doesn't trust us anymore. They know all we want to do is sell, promote. That kind of candid, and to Mike's point, we did have some language that we couldn't put in here, but we got some really direct feedback.
So we hope you'll download it. The upshot from that is that, and if you read it, you'll see this. One of the big themes that surfaced in that report was that of trust. And that, you know, as I've mentioned, is kind of important to what we're all about. So we thought we can afford to take the CXO report, the original report, as a jumping off point for that theme, and engage a handful of other people that we knew, frankly, who have had to implement trust-based initiatives for some pretty big brands. The difference in this report from the first one is that I would say that the first report is fairly high-level thinking. These are the themes we need to approach. This next report, the deep dive on trust and transparency, really is street level. This is about what you have to do to implement and to gain trust, or to build trust where it's either been eroded or just never existed in the first place because customer expectations changed. So over on the left, you'll see a list of some of the people that have participated, but we filled this one with the stories, the anecdotes, because we think it adds color and context to how you need to approach these things. Because trust and transparency are no longer, they're no longer just nice things to have if you're a top brand. They're absolute necessities in today's, well, I can't say every, but many, many customer relationships.
So we asked and looked at not just the number of the folks that you'll see in the CXO report, right, in the road to customization, but the detail. How do you activate what it is that you've heard? We asked some folks what they have to say, right? You'll see some things in here from Kevin Ackroyd, and you'll see some things again from Tim Souther. No, in the secondary report, the deep dive around trust, you know, that I want to take a moment to tell you that we went to Charlie Swift and we asked him his take. For those of you in New York, many of you may know him. I mean, I knew him in 1998 when we put the first Prospect Universe in with Axiom and American Express. He's lived this. He's lived what it is that happens when overpromotion and stimulation crush your activity. You'll see Teralyn Taranju, right? And so go look at what she's done. She ran Marriott Rewards and then turned around and built it for Choice. Kevin Bauer, e-commerce expert, been here, done that, right? Fingerhut, Cabela's, Harry and David, big brands, Mark, Scholl, Nielsen. And one of the things that these folks provided was sort of insight in what are you going to do different? In fact, what should you do different? Because if trust is critical and you know that that's the case and you're hearing about it, how do you stop your promotion engine? You're on the hamster wheel, and you know most of the time marketers are basically just spinning that wheel faster when they need to hit their number. I'm low on my number, run more campaigns. The MarTech stack, the velocity by which I need to run campaigns, let's just do more of that. And that's sort of the conundrum we find ourselves in marketing. And now that we can, and we are, right, all the way back to one-to-one from Peppers and Rogers, we're definitely capable of doing it. Should we do it? And that's what you're going to hear from these folks. They're gonna help us understand a little bit about what we can do to take a step back.
So we heard all this. We've digested it. We've compiled it, and we've talked about it, I would say ad nauseum, back at the customer amongst ourselves. But we decided that, and really this goes to who we are here, we decided that if we're going to really have any valid things to say about the topic, then we need to understand on a first person basis. So we decided to do something about that, and Michael's going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So we decided to take a look at trust, and so we decided to take a look at it, but we decided to go against the status quo, right? The customer is building a lot of capability around this notion of trust and really advocating for the customer and or consumer, however you want to term it. But we also were cognizant of the fact that there are enough banners and there are enough cookies and there are enough things that follow us around in an intrusive way on the web that we opted to not do that. We could have went and said we were going to put some sort of paid social program together across LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and we chose not to do that. In fact, we actually have an audience list. We've built it, and we have names in it, but we chose not to use that really either. What we said we were going to do was no ads, no lists, no banners, no promotions at all. It would be purely organic. We were going to build the report. We were going to publish the report, and then we were going to publish the fact that we'd done it through our own postings. We encouraged people on our network to post. We encouraged people to read it. But it was really around establishing the notion of trust on a complete organic basis. We had an idea of what we were going to get. We got more than we thought. We're only halfway through the campaign, and partially that has been extended due to COVID, but we're only partially through the first wave. And what we're about to present to you are the numbers that we were able to pull together in a campaign and in an effort like this. I'm going to call this a B2B effort, right? Because it's the customer reaching out to brands and service providers in the marketing landscape. the numbers in a B2B campaign are really strong. The audience definition. I mean, in fact, if I was in my world before running a big ESPN agency, these numbers would be really, really great. I'm going to be super conservative around the things that we talk about as we go forward. And then I'll share with you a little bit of the results that we were able to capture through some of the mechanics we deployed in terms of asking, not demanding. My call to action was, would you do me a favor? Right.
Right. Would you help us out? And that's
right. Would you help us out? Right. There's no, if you do this, you get this. You get a discount for that. You could have access. None of that. It was, we would love your feedback if you'd be open to it. That's it. So if we can go to the next slide, Mike.
Okay. No quid pro quo. Sure. Let's get there. Here we go.
So we took a look at a few different things, and we looked at the total number of people that landed on the page, but we opted to not, go through too much of that, because the people that landed 95% of the time, they viewed and downloaded the report. And it was at that point that we just asked the question, would you be willing to share some information with us? So downloading the report, like you could, depending on how you look at things, you could in fact say that was a conversion. I'm just going to say that that's an engaged audience. They did download the report. They did get the value of getting what it is that we were presenting. So you could say from a content consumption standpoint, that was the conversion. We're not going to say that. It's the engaged audience. But of that engaged audience, 21% of them turned around and said, well, we're going to convert a step further. And we're going to answer the first bucket of questions that you've asked, i.e. survey 1. 21.3% of them did that. That's a pretty good number to start with. But when they started, they continued. They continued heavily going forward, and 93% of the 21% completed the second round of questions. 87.7 completed the third, and 86 completed the fourth. And what it says is people were engaged long enough to go through the process without dropping off too far. You can say, well, why did they do that? Well, we got some pretty interesting feedback beyond that, right? So the questions that we're asking deep-seated questions, right? Are you getting the value of what it is that you're doing and investing in? Are you able to engage more effectively with consumers? Where does trust fit in your priority? How are you seeing it in terms of impacting your programs? So Mike, if you'll go to the next slide.
Sure.
There's some really interesting feedback that we got in terms of the questions that we were asking, right? So 65% of respondents said that their ability to activate their data through the platform that they're using was 3 or less, right? So that doesn't feel to me like they're really confident that they can activate their data and insights, right? The return on investment, right? 36% said that their confidence in getting value from their cloud investments. 36% of them said that they were either a 4 or a 5, which means 64% said that they were average or less in terms of capitalizing on their investment from a MarTech standpoint. Did my engagement actually improve? Doesn't seem like it. Maybe those platforms, as you'll see in the paper, maybe those platforms really weren't designed to drive engagement. Maybe they're just designed to create velocity and automation that allows me to do a lot more lights out things. But am I really engaging the consumer? Am I asking them what it is that's meaningful to them rather than just flushing them with promotion and stimulation? 60% of the people class their MarTech and AdTech platforms way too complex, much too difficult to manage effectively. So if it's too difficult to manage, does that impact their return on investment? And is their return on investment not being realized because they can't activate their data? So those are questions that we were asking, because I think any marketer that's out there today right now understands that there's this whole notion of a cloud. And the cloud is supposed to bring me rain. My crops need moisture in order for them to grow. So where's my rain? Well, maybe that's not what they were meant to do. And maybe establishing and developing trust is part of what we have to look at in terms of how we build meaningful strategies from a messaging standpoint that aren't overwhelming. So that's sort of what we found. The data is very, very rich. There'll be more data coming out as we release it in terms of the things that we're learning. We encourage you to go, if you haven't, go to the customer, download the report, go through the journey. Right? By the way, that's a shameless plug, and I realize I'm giving it. But remember, this is an organic effort, so it's the only way we have to promote it.
There you go. And so just to break that down a little bit further, the first slide, the slide we saw a moment ago, had to do with how people engaged with our questions. And I've been in this world for, how long have we been doing this, Michael? Long time. Let's say decades and leave it there. But to see continual engagement numbers at that level, I can honestly tell you I've not seen it before. I've not seen continual engagement through a series like that ever before. And I've done quite a bit of this. Seen some great numbers, but nothing like that. And I think that had to do with the fact that we did not dangle a carrot. There was no if then, quid pro quo. There was none of that. It was simply, we could use your insight and we could use your help. And that level of empathy and that level of, I would say, just human conversation right there is all we did. And I can't emphasize enough, we didn't spend anything. We intentionally said, we're not going to spend anything here, no ad spend, no promotional spend of any sort. So I'm really impressed with that. This slide that we're looking at has to do with the findings from the actual questions that we posed. As Michael said, this is pretty rich stuff, and what we're going to be publishing in a subsequent report when the entire effort is completed, we'll have all of these insights compiled and how people responded to them. And I think that's going to offer something to the greater DMCNY community in terms of insights as to how you can conduct business with your client base and with each other. So we set out to prove a couple of things, and here's what we walked away with. When engagement is everything, if you let your customers sit in the driver's seat, they will interact with you. If you earn their trust rather, and you earn their data. And then that data in turn becomes something that has utility well beyond that particular transaction. Data that is given in that fashion, when there's a value exchange, can travel with you, as we've just proven, through miles down a transaction funnel. And so I don't know where we are on time. Ginger, I know that we wanted to open up the conversation for questions.
Yes, we have time for that, definitely.
Great. Well, let me just say thanks to everybody for joining us, for holding off on wine time until this is over.
Some of us.
Some of us have, and some of us didn't. But if you have any questions, Michael and I can stick around for a little bit and see if we can answer some.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your insight. Some interesting data points there and some really interesting quotes that you shared. Just a reminder, if you haven't asked a question, if you haven't put a question in the question box, please go ahead. And I do have a couple to kick us off. How did you decide on the questions to ask in the engagement journey?
Michael, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think after spending some time with the audience of people, or the group of people that we were capturing information from, it became very clear that engagement and trust is going to become more and more important in today's regulatory and compliance environment. So if that's in fact the case, what are you going to do about that? And does the technology, as an example that you have, does it accommodate that? Does the data accommodate that? You know, we talked to Bernice Grossman, who's been doing this for a few months now, and she has probably deployed I don't know, hundreds of different MarTech stacks as it relates to building data infrastructure. And her view of the world was very clear. It's not about the technology, it's about the data. And are you prepared to do something about it? So that led us to really define some questions that were going to allow us to get at, are you prepared for the consumer that you're facing today? And that's really where we went down the path of starting to design questions. Well, does your stack meet what it is that you need it to? Can you make it do what it is that's necessary to engage the right way? You know, Ron Stopa talks specifically about this is not a transactional relationship anymore. It's an engaged one. So stop looking at your event data. There were a few other bombs in there that we can't say, but his view of the world is, I don't care about open. I don't care about click. I don't care about all of the event data I collect in my environment. I want to know what it is that you're telling me that's important to you. I know how to sell the items that we have. I just want to know what you're trying to do when you come to buy them. So that really resulted in sort of the design for the questions that we asked at a high level.
The other thing I think that is probably worth mentioning here is that the sequence that we had set this up was really intentional. In every white paper report I've ever downloaded, it asks me for the basic information, then I can get the report. And if they want more information from me, I have to go through that before I get my carrot. And we said, that's not the way we're going to structure this. You can, we want your name and email address. And after that, you're free to take the report with no other obligations towards us whatsoever. On the other hand, if you'd like to help us out with this, here's a couple of questions. So it was of their absolute free will, and we wanted to sensitize that along the way, but we were really pleased with the results.
Great, thanks. Another great question. I believe that consumers want a personalized customer experience, but not at any cost. I agree. What specifically should the customer get in return to help build a trusted relationship?
So say the question again, Ginger.
Sure. Consumers want a personalized experience, but not at any cost. What specifically should the customer get in return to help build a trusted relationship?
So I think that's a great question. Do we know who asked that? Tell them it's a great question. Tell them it's a great question. Because the reality is, shouldn't that be defined by the consumer? The reality is they know what you're doing with their data now. They're aware of it. They ask questions about it. In fact, we see from time to time, we see customers or consumers via their ratings and rankings saying, where'd you get that data? How do you know that about me? What are you using it for? Right? So the backlash has begun. And just because I can, as Tim Souther points out, just because I can doesn't mean I should. So the value exchange, it is not at all costs. But why am I not asking you what it is that's important to you? And why am I not asking you so that I can explain to you how I'm going to use the data to serve you more effectively? That's a value exchange, and that's a cost consumers are willing to bear if you're going to make their life easier. And that's a great question, Tony Pecci. Thank you for telling me that you did it. But that to me is the value exchange that I think consumers are after. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think brands better figure out how they're going to get their arms around that and get their arms around it quickly. Because if not, then you're going to engage with the disintermediaries that are going to take you off your game. You're going to further enable the tolerance factor that Facebook and that Amazon and that Google bring to the table, right? We'll deal with them because we have to. And you're going to take your relationship and you're going to hand it to them. So ask the question. The consumer is happy to tell you what the value exchange should be if you ask. If you demand, you're probably not going to get much.
All right, thanks. Is the survey open to brands, publishers, agencies, ad tech folks, etc.?
Anyone can go in.
Sure.
We do not. We are not discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. Right now, we are literally looking at how do we collect this data without putting a demand, as Mike pointed out there. We could have gated this content in a heartbeat, and the content's really rich. We chose not to. You can give us the registration data. Here's the report. The rest of the data that we published to you was because we asked you for a favor. Would you be willing to help?
Yeah.
We got really great results from that, but anybody can take it.
All right. And so, similar question, what opportunities would you, let's try this again. What opportunities might be available for DMCNY members to participate in future research?
Oh, well, that's a great question too. We have about a half a dozen projects that are right now on the drawing board, and at least 2 of those are ones that we have talked about looping in DMCNY members for. So we're a little ahead of you on that, and we can talk about those a little bit further as they get a little closer to reality. But let's just say there are some, and they're exciting, and they're data driven and data based.
And we want to encourage all DMCNY members to raise their hand, right? We are never going to turn things down. We're always going to want to have conversations. We're always going to want to discuss it. The world's changing. We're all facing it. Let's not run from it. Let's embrace it. So join us. Help us. You see, when you look at the plethora of people that we've invited into these first reports, we've invited them because they have a point of view and they have an opinion, but we're not saying that no one else should be invited. Come on. Help us.
Excellent.
Yeah, in fact, if I may, the 2 people that we spoke with for the original CXO report that we didn't publish, it wasn't because we didn't like what they were saying. It was because they had spoken, maybe, how do we say this politely? They had spoken a little bit too, transparently.
Maybe they disclosed some things that shouldn't be in.
Right. So they opted out on their behalf. But to answer your question, Ginger, this is one of the things we're all about is creating a conversation on these topics. So it's open to everybody.
Excellent.
And we love to have people join us in these topics, but if you come back again and you're here without wine, then we're going to have another conversation.
Just for the record, this is here. It's just empty at the moment. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Mine's not.
But will be soon.
Yes, it's almost over.
Well, Mike and Michael, I want to thank you again so much for all of the great information today, and for giving some insight to us to not only the reports but also to the the results of your own experience. So I love that it's a little bit of like what you found from the 2 reports, but then what you found from your own research as well. So that was a great combination. I want to let everyone in the audience know, just to remind you, we've got next week is motivating mid-level managers. It's a really important topic. I know a lot of you are either running marketing or running marketing services companies. You've got people who are disparate workers at this point, and as much as you're motivating the troops at the high level, they're motivating the troops maybe more day to day. So it's really important to motivate them. And David Allison knows all about values and research. You may remember him from our data breakfast a few months back. So he's going to share some research that I think you'll find really interesting. Not on here, but coming up soon. The following week, we're going to get into whether or not you should be podcasting. So should you, and if so, how should you go about either kicking it off or taking it to the next level to help that be a part of your marketing mix. And then a sneak peek of what's coming up on June 17th. Bruce Beagle, who does the annual Outlook in January, is going to do an update of his data and forecasts based on everything that's been happening with COVID-19. So I look forward to seeing you all then. And thanks again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your afternoon and evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ginger.
Thank you, everyone.